Excuse me, I got a bag of tricks here. All right, thank you. Thank you for everyone for coming out. And you just get emotional for me. I always practice not to get emotional, but it just never happens. Because it's an ongoing nightmare. But it's so important to keep that nightmare right in front of my head. I don't know who wrote it once, but when you have a nightmare, 2 days that night, you just can't stand it when you first wake up. And you've all had horrible nightmares. And you wake up and you can't believe you're there or you're still in the nightmare. Well, I make an attempt to live in that nightmare because if the nightmare goes away, I get complacent. And that's important to me, is not to be complacent. Because I owe it to my son to find out what happened. I really do. But it makes it very difficult because it keeps that emotion constantly alive. It doesn't take much for me to get upset. But again, I didn't want to talk about that, but I just, everywhere I go, I try to prepare myself. I say, just stay cool. But as soon as I get up at the mic, I think of Bobby. And he's dead. He was murdered. So sometimes I worry. I get more. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people here who remember the 60s. Life magazine. What did Life magazine do about the Vietnam War? Every single week, they put pictures of children, soldiers. The war was not sanitized. Well, the government really learned a lesson. Everything's become sort of sanitized. The theorizing about 9/11 becomes theorized. We're losing a face. Here's a face. That's a face that was 26 years old. And he was murdered. And I'm running off course. I didn't get a chance. Well, I'll just do what I can. But Bobby for people who have never heard me speak, Bobby was a Princeton graduated in 93. Or graduated in 97 from Princeton, graduated in 93 from Howard Dublin High School, so real close to here. Went to Princeton, graduated, and got a job immediately up in New York City. He was in publishing. But one of his main, in fact, his only client in his last job was Merrill Lynch. So he got out of publishing and he started with Burson Marcel. Well, anyway, that day, 2000, September 11th, 2000, I worked at Merrill Lynch, which was across the street. Lived at 66 between 1st and 2nd. He just loved me. He used to come up for lunch on weekends. He was so proud of himself how he could hail a taxi, that he knew the subway system back and forth. God knows how many times I've been up to. I was up in New York City twice this week. I had to go to different places in Brooklyn. Subway system is the most difficult thing. I get panic attacks. I'm afraid I can't put my Visa card in the thing because if there's people behind you, they start screaming at me. It's a tough job, but he was always so proud of himself that he had that subway system. So he just loved New York. And I love it too because it's the greatest place in the world. But on that morning, he said 66 between 1st and 2nd, went up and got the subway. Takes it down, I think he gets off at, I forget the street names already. But anyway, he was supposed to be in Merrill Lynch at 9 o'clock. So he walks down, and this is the scenario. Now remember, I'm a parent. I certainly will proudly say I'm part of the 9/11 truth movement. But I am doing it for one purpose and one purpose only. I have an obligation to my son to find out what happened to him. I know what happened to him. He was brutally murdered. But at that time, I certainly didn't know it. But much of my investigation is on what happened to Bobby. Again, if you've ever lost a child, you want to know, did he suffer? Did she suffer for 2 seconds, for a nanosecond, or for half a second, for 10 seconds, whatever? And that's my obligation. But Dale, you always want to know that. My wife will never talk about that. But I know it's in her mind. So after 9/11, we immediately went up to New York. And like everyone else, just roaming around. But there weren't any bodies around. But we still had hope because people at Merrill Lynch said, well, he was supposed to be at Merrill Lynch. But my thing when I went up to New York, I just sort of knew he was dead. Because there had to be at least, just from us, phone calls. And his cell phone was receiving the cell calls. So then we thought, well, maybe he's in a hospital somewhere, unconscious. So we went up there, we just looked all over, we had like 15 people. I remember being with the Cantor Fitzgerald people. And we're just moving en masse throughout New York City. This is on Wednesday, September 12th. My son was extremely optimistic. I know we'll find him. But I just, because he's not answering the phone, but of course there was some hope. And on Thursday, we're up at his best friend's apartments up at 77th Street. And his father worked at the prison. I forget the prison. What's the prison? Rikers Island, up in New York City. We had detectives out trying to find out what happened. Well, we're up there around 2 o'clock, maybe 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, because we were out all morning. And we get a call from one of the detectives. They said he was found. The elation, unbelievable. But then we got the message. He was dead on arrival. So when they told us where to go, we went down to, they had down at Canal Street. They had, not a triage center, but a command post. So we went down, all 15 of us went down there. And they let us in immediately. And they took us into a big room. Now, I don't talk about Rudy Giuliani because, I'll mention this in a second, because I think he's part of the criminal act, because the fact that the evidence, I love watching CSI all the time. And I always try to relate it to 9/11. And I said, Jesus Christ, there's nothing was investigated about that day. When you learn later that this is a piece from the towers. I'll just mention that in a second. But anyway, we go into a room. They provided psychologists, social workers, and we go in the big room. Now we know he's dead on a rock, but we don't know where he is. So Rudy comes into the room, and he sat down with us for an hour, and just told us, unsolicited, didn't come in with anyone. And we talked for an hour. Just started, we talked about Bobby, which was great. This is one of the big problems of 9/11. This is why it's great to come here, because I get a chance to talk about Bobby. My friends don't want to talk about him. They're afraid to bring it up. And that's the worst thing that can happen, that you don't get a chance to talk about your son. It really is. But anyway, he came in, and because of him, he gave me a car, a police escort, and then a Sergeant Trelesko, who was my guardian angel at that time. We went to the morgue with the police car and a police escort. We got to the morgue, we were there 3 hours. Sergeant Trelesko comes out and says,